Captain Midnight.
This video is brought to you by CuriosityStream. Keanu Reeves is not an actor that anyone would mistake for Daniel Day-Lewis. That sounds like an insult, but I don't really mean it to be. Since beginning his acting career in the mid-80s, he has played a lot of different kinds of roles. But all of those characters feel unmistakably Keanu. He's just not someone who disappears into a role like Lewis does. Now that's been true of a lot of movie stars through the years, from Humphrey Bogart to Arnold Schwarzenegger to Tom Cruise. But Keanu Reeves has a very unique movie star persona, and one that I think has only grown more interesting with age. He's an actor who agrees to roles both big and small, and he's worked with some of the best directors in film history, as well as some straight-to-DVD guys you've probably never heard of, even when his career is on the upswing. I think that's something worth examining. So it just feels right that my last video of 2020 would focus on one of the film industry's most earnest and distinct stars. Before I get started though, I should say that Reeves has been in over 100 film and TV projects, and there's just no way that I can give them all the time and attention that they deserve. So if there's something I don't touch on that you feel really passionate about, feel free to leave a comment about it down below.
I know Kung Fu. Show me.
Born in Lebanon but raised in Toronto, Canada, Keanu Reeves' entry into show business was far from the overnight success that you might expect. He spent years in local stage productions, Canadian sitcoms like Hangin' In, and TV movies like Babes in Toyland, and then finally made his feature film debut in a small role in the Patrick Swayze and Rob Lowe hockey film Youngblood. Shortly after Youngblood, and another film that critics enjoyed, River's Edge, he was cast in Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure in 1986, a small film with a budget of under $9 million. Bill and Ted was the perfect project for the young Reeves. It tapped into everything he did best at the time. The fun, hangout sitcom persona, the earnestness that he'd been playing in teen dramas, and even the verbose dialogue of his Shakespeare stage productions. So it came out and immediately shot Reeves to fame, right? Well, not exactly. See, the small distributor, DEG, was buried in debt and literally couldn't afford to release the movie, so it sat on the shelf for years. And Reeves moved on, determined to put teenage roles behind him, believing that teen dramas and TV comedies were stifling what he could do as an actor. He was in his 20s now and wanted to play more mature characters. And he did, turning in a solid performance in the Oscar-nominated period piece Dangerous Liaisons. For Reeves, it was probably a signal that teen roles were in the rearview mirror. But then, Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure actually came out. After a 3-year delay and change of distributors, the film finally opened in February 1989. And suddenly, the character that he was best known for around the world was exactly the kind of role that he thought he had left behind. Not that Reeves was complaining, he eagerly signed up for a sequel, Bogus Journey, which was released a few years later. '89 also happened to be the year that Ron Howard's Parenthood was released. He had a fairly small role in it as Todd Higgins, but critics singled him out as giving one of the most funny performances in the movie, which seemed to really seal the deal. After both Bill and Ted and Parenthood, Keanu Reeves went from an up-and-coming actor to a full-blown movie star. He took advantage of that quickly, and 1991 became his biggest year yet, bringing 3 vastly different films: Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey, Point Break, and My Own Private Idaho. Bogus proved to be another solid hit, and though not as beloved as the first film, it became something of a cult classic. I don't love it, but I definitely admire how weird it's willing to get in breaking with the first film's formula. The other two, though, I find a little more interesting. Point Break was the first time that Reeves was positioned as an action star. Director Catherine Bigelow, who of course would go on to make The Hurt Locker and Zero Dark 30, cast him as Johnny Utah, a hotshot young cop trying to infiltrate a group of surfers who are robbing banks across California. If that plot description sounds goofy, you're not wrong. Unlike Bigelow's later work, Point Break is proudly over the top, even verging on surreal at times. And I think it works. Patrick Swayze is great as Bodhi, the leader of the surfers who is determined to live his life outside of a system he sees as soul-crushing and purposefully limiting. And since he robs insured banks and not people, he really doesn't think taking what his group needs is doing anyone any harm. He's definitely a lot more likable of a character than Reeves' Utah, who is kind of stiff as a board, especially in the first half of the film. This is a performance that's pointed to as proof that Reeves is not a good actor, but honestly, I think this is exactly the Johnny Utah that Bigelow wanted. The character is almost a blank slate when he's first introduced, and all of that changes when meeting Bodhi, who makes him see life in an entirely new way, for better or worse. Swayze is more fun in the movie, sure, but I think Reeves is great at what this specific role asks of him. The last film of 1991 was not nearly the hit that Point Break was, but I think it's worth noting just how different this role was from both Ted and Johnny Utah. My Own Private Idaho sees him paired with River Phoenix in a story about two struggling gay sex workers on the streets of Seattle and Portland. The film was a low-budget passion project for director Gus Van Sant, and watching it now, it's kind of incredible how strange this movie is. It's an odd blend of grounded, often brutal realism, dreamscapes, and Shakespearean dialogue. I'm not sure how well it really hangs together as one film, but no one could ever accuse it of being formulaic. Keanu has the most interesting role in the film as Scott, the son of a wealthy mayor who has abandoned his life of luxury for the streets. And I think he's really great here. The movie changes tonally so much from scene to scene, and he does a great job of keeping up with it. Going from really casual, naturalistic dialogue to literally giving speeches from Shakespeare's Henry IV, all in the span of like 10 minutes. It's not a film that will work for everyone, but it showed off his range better than maybe any movie had at that point. 1991 was also the year he formed his alt-rock band Dogstar, which actually lasted over a decade. I won't spend much time on them except to say that when asked about it years later, Reeves simply said, "It would have helped if our band was better." Speaking of things that didn't work out too well for the actor, 1992 saw him give probably the single most mocked and maybe even hated performance of his career in Bram Stoker's Dracula. Directed by Apocalypse Now and Godfather director Francis Ford Coppola, Dracula is a very heightened, stylized take on the old novel. I think it's a pretty gorgeous film, but one of its biggest problems is, sadly, Keanu Reeves. He's terrible as Jonathan Harker, not made any better by the fact that his British accent feels like it wouldn't make the cut in a community theater production, let alone a massive, prestigious film. I'm really not sure why he's so bad here, honestly. Like, he's perfectly fine in Midsummer's Night Dream as Don John the year after, but he was just painfully miscast in Dracula, and I'm kinda shocked that Coppola didn't recast him after seeing this performance. Thankfully, things got back on track for Keanu Reeves in 1994, mostly due to the massive hit that was Speed. And for me, Speed is one of the ideal 90s blockbuster action movies. The premise is as goofy as it is suspenseful. Dennis Hopper has placed a bomb on a bus that will explode if it goes less than 50 miles per hour. The whole film is basically carried on Keanu Reeves and Sandra Bullock's backs, and they do a great job keeping a premise that could get old fast really engaging. The script, which was extensively rewritten at the last minute by Joss Whedon, was originally going to have Reeves' character Jack Travern be an early Bruce Willis type, a wisecracking guy who had a badass quip for everything. That changed when they cast Keanu. His version of Jack is a very earnest character, taking the situation on screen seriously, no matter how goofy the action gets. Sure, he gets a couple one-liners at the end, but for the most part, Jack Travern really played to Reeves' strengths. Because I think his biggest strength as a dramatic actor is that he never has any kind of ironic distance from the material or seems to view himself as above it. Even in his most misguided performances, like Dracula, he's really committed to the role. And unlike someone like Bruce Willis, he's not an actor you see phoning in roles. I think another reason people have latched onto him over the years is that he doesn't seem to have a huge on or off-screen ego that many actors do. Reeves is perfectly fine being upstaged by another actor, like he was in Point Break, if it serves the movie he's working on. This kind of makes him the anti-Steven Seagal, someone who's constantly concerned with his character being perceived as cool in every possible situation. After Speed, the rest of the mid-90s didn't quite pack the same punch for Keanu Reeves' career. Sure, there was Johnny Mnemonic, a cyberpunk thriller that I think has held up pretty well, but a lot of his other films around this time, like Little Buddha and Chain Reaction, are just pretty forgettable stuff. Keanu has never had the best track record with romance films, but later films like Destination Wedding and The Lake House, while far from great, are still much better than 1995's A Walk in the Clouds. Devil's Advocate is a bright spot though. Reeves ostensibly plays the main character, but anyone who has seen the film can tell you that it's the Al Pacino show through and through, which is by design. Reeves actually signed on to the movie first and took a giant pay cut from his usual rate to make sure that they got Pacino on board. And I think Reeves is solid in the film. He's definitely in the less showy role, but that's something the actor has never really had a problem with. Then we come to the film that changed his career forever, The Matrix. And I mean, what's there to say about this film that hasn't been said already? One thing I do think is worth mentioning, even now, is how well Reeves fits the role of Neo. Like in Speed, he wasn't actually the first choice to play the lead. The Wachowski sisters approached Will Smith, which makes sense, the actor was riding really high after the success of Independence Day. But Reeves, I think, is just a much better fit for the role. For the character's transformation to work, you really need to buy Neo as both a bored office drone searching for meaning and as like a Zen-like messiah, and Reeves handles both sides of the character perfectly. Watching Neo break free from the bonds of the Matrix and defeat the machines in their own program is still so fun to watch. I really think this is the most rewatchable sci-fi film of the 90s, and that ending is still perfect. Of course, the sequels proved a lot more divisive. And while I admire a lot of the big concepts and ideas, and some of the big action set pieces in Reloaded, Revolutions just kind of loses me entirely. Reeves still does a good job in those films, but I don't think he's given nearly as much interesting material to play. Even Neo's sacrifice feels more dramatically inert than it should, something that I'm hoping changes in the upcoming Matrix 4. The Matrix gave Reeves another huge career boost at a time where he really needed it, landing roles in the slightly underrated The Replacements and the more than slightly underrated The Gift, where he plays the villain. That's already a pretty big change for him, but his character, Donnie Barksdale, isn't just the bad guy of the film, he's also a serial killer. Directed by Sam Raimi just before the first Spider-Man film, The Gift saw Keanu harnessing his persona in a unique way, turning everything that's usually so likable about his performances on their head. It's well worth checking out if you missed it, which, judging by the box office, a lot of people did. He also returned as an action star in Constantine, a film that never quite rises to the level of its source material, but which I still think is a pretty good time. When it came out, comic book fans were fairly down on his performance. And while, sure, it's a bit different than the one we see in the comics, but I still think he made the role work for him, and I've been happy to see the film slowly growing a cult audience over time. If I had to pick one underrated Keanu vehicle though, it would be A Scanner Darkly, Richard Linklater's animated oddity based on a Philip K. Dick story. The author had based the story on his own experiences with drugs, and how they can slowly strip someone of their own identity. And Linklater is very faithful to that vision, giving us a movie that's uncomfortable, almost suffocating in its execution. It's a sci-fi film that feels more like a slow descent into paranoia than some blockbuster thrill ride. And the ending is a gut punch that snaps the whole film into focus in a way that few endings can. Oh, and Keanu Reeves is fantastic in this movie. He plays a man slowly losing touch with reality and his own identity, something that I could see a young Keanu not being able to pull off. But here, he brings a newfound world wariness to it that he didn't really have as a younger actor, something he would really put to good use in John Wick. Honestly though, I think this might be the best performance of his entire career, and I really hope he's able to work with Linklater more in the future. After 2006 though, he hit a rough patch. Films like The Bland, The Day the Earth Stood Still, and 47 Ronin just weren't hitting, and it definitely seemed like the actor's best days were behind him. That changed in 2014, and I think we all know why. John Wick opened on October 24th and quickly became a surprise mega hit. Made on a much smaller budget than most blockbusters, John Wick was the result of Reeves' stunt coordinators from The Matrix coming to him with an idea, and Reeves doing everything he could to get that idea made. The movie's action just feels so refreshing in an age of PG-13 CGI spectacle. Here was an R-rated, well-choreographed, and beautifully designed action opera. And the actor is at the center of it all, giving a really committed performance that changed how people viewed him. Gone was the clean-cut hero of Speed or Point Break. Keanu leans into his age here, giving us a melancholy, soulful character who really felt like the complete opposite of the quippy action stars that dominated the 2010s. The John Wick films have pretty simple narratives, but Reeves holds them together by giving us a lead you can't help but root for. Since John Wick, Keanu Reeves' career has been almost catapulted into meme status, where him just showing up in something can be the joke. And I'm not sure how I feel about that, honestly. While it's great to see an actor I like getting kind of a third career renaissance, and clearly having a good time in things like the new Bill and Ted film, I think part of what I liked about him so much is his earnestness and his willingness to serve the story, even when that means he's not the only one in the spotlight. But things like his cameo in Always Be My Maybe feels a lot more winking and self-aware than that. Like the movie is expecting us to laugh just because Keanu Reeves showed up in it. Something that I also feel about his role in the new SpongeBob film, and even to a lesser extent Toy Story 4. I haven't played Cyberpunk 2077 yet, but I'm excited to see whether that character has the depth that I'm hoping for, or if it's just coasting off of Keanu being cast in the role. In the end though, I'm just happy to see that Reeves is still working as much as he does, and in as many genres of films that he does. Whether it's a rom-com with Winona Ryder or a big-budget action film, Reeves is always committed to the role. And that served him well during both the successful periods of his career and the rougher patches. He's a fundamentally unselfish actor who, by almost all accounts, is a total pro and great to work with, which seems to be less common than it should. So I think as long as Keanu Reeves wants to act, there will always be a place for him in film.
Dude, this is a totally deep hole. Yeah!
Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey.
You know, this has been a really weird year to be a movie channel, since there's not really movies coming out. Still, I've loved talking about more off the beaten path stuff, like the careers of interesting actors and some of my favorite TV title sequences. Right now, on my streaming service Nebula, I have videos on Cheers and Rick and Morty, where I take a deep dive into what made those shows' title sequences work so well. Other creators have talked about the title sequences for Batman, Buffy, Westworld, and a ton more. Not only that, but all the videos I upload to Nebula are ad-free. I'm far from alone. Nebula features Lindsay Ellis, Just Right, Nando V Movies, among a ton of others. That's because stuff that might not work on YouTube can find a great home on Nebula. And if you sign up through Curiosity Stream, you also get a great documentary streaming service at the same time, featuring tons of docs on tech, history, science, and more. Right now, Curiosity Stream is offering the best deal of the year, a 41% discount that runs until January 3rd, meaning there's never been a better time to get both Curiosity Stream and Nebula. So you can get both for less than $15, not a month, a year. Get in on this ridiculous deal and go to curiositystream.com/captainmidnight. That's curiositystream.com/captainmidnight.
Here's a special tip for the fellas and girls who have not already joined Captain Midnight's new 1940 Flight Patrol. You'd better hurry up and join at once, because there's a big adventure ahead. The thing to do now is to get started, because we're going to have not only barrels of fun, but loads of free gifts and prizes too.